Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships here at Sales Hacker. We have a great topic today, and it's really fitting as we wind down the year. The topic is how to build a winning sales tech stack in 2018. Now, before we jump into introductions, I wanted to take care of a few housekeeping matters. So, number one, we will be recording this session, and it will be available afterwards in case you need to jump off or want to share it out with a colleague. Number two, as you all know, we love our webinars to be interactive. So with this in mind, please feel free to go to the chat feature, introduce yourself, your name, your title, your company, size of your sales team. Our panelists definitely want to hear from you. So please ask questions as we go through the webinar. For this webinar, we will be fielding the questions at the end in a little Q&A session. But now that we have that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest presenters. I'm joined by two amazing guests, Nancy Nardin, founder of Smart Selling Tools, and Jake Rennie, Sales Manager of Enterprise Inside Sales at Adobe. Nancy and Jake, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having.
So the three of us chatted last week, and I think I need to provide a little more background on the two of you, just for the sake of the audience, because both of you have had some amazing careers. So Nancy, you started Smart Selling Tools 9 years ago to help sales ops, and sales enablement leaders keep up to date on technology that drives sales. Your sales career began in the early 80s at Silicon Valley, a startup which, believe it or not, was the world's first laptop computer called Grid. I thought that was pretty cool, and that was even before CRM, which is crazy. You've broken records selling to the likes of Microsoft, HP, Sun, Intel, Oracle, and during your sales career, you have worked for leading analyst firms such as Gardner Group and IDC, and running Smart Selling Tools, you've been recognized as one of the 35 most influential women in B2B tech marketing, one of the top 25 sales bloggers in the world, and top 30 social sales influencers in the world as well. Wow, impressive stuff. And next, Mr. Jake Rennie is a sales practitioner and leader with a ton of experience really across the board in SaaS, marketing tech, sales tech, medical tech, HR tech, and ed tech. And I like this. You are a self-proclaimed sales nerd, which is awesome. You also happen to be a Sales Hacker ambassador that helps sales leaders and individual sales professionals who want to take their organization and careers to the next level. So very cool.
Yes. Yeah, not nearly as impressive as Nancy, but I'll take it. Thank you.
You're too humble. Well, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. So I'm just really going to kick back, let you two do your thing, and just soak up all this knowledge. So Nancy, do you want to start us off?
Well, sure. First of all, thanks for the introduction. And Jake, it's so not true in terms of my background compared to yours. I think I just have a better bio copywriter. But I appreciate that nice intro. And I'm excited to be here. Anytime anyone wants to talk about building a sales stack, that's what I've been focused on for the past 9 years, and even to some degree before then during my whole career. And I know it's confusing. And I really do hope that we can help people that are on the line today have a few concrete steps that they can take to figure out what do they need to do next in order to build a winning sales tech stack. So should be a good conversation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it, Nancy. You know that like I said, I'm a self-proclaimed sales nerd, and I think part of what comes along with that is my passion for the sales tech stack, and so I couldn't be any more thrilled to be on a topic with you. So why don't we just jump right into it? And I know this is kind of maybe a weird question to kick off a topic that we have chosen around sales tech stack, but the reality is I've heard you yourself say it's actually we should be thinking about people, process, and then technology. So shouldn't we be focusing on technology last? Why are we thinking today that sales stacking is the topic we want to be discussing.
Yeah, well, I think people are used to thinking of all three of those, people, process, and technology. But unfortunately, what I see is a lot of companies forgetting about the technology part until the end. And that's a mistake, because you really have to think about how is the technology going to fit in with what we're doing on the people and process side. And then also, when we figure out what we need to do on people and process, how are we going to use technology to help us execute on those goals for people and process. And you can't do that at the end. It really has to be woven in together. I think of it as a three-legged stool. And, you can't sit on a three-legged stool with only two legs and then later add the third one. I mean, it just doesn't work. You have to have them all at once. So, you asked about, why should we be thinking about, or the technology, shouldn't that be kind of last? A lot of people think, look, I've got CRM, isn't that enough? So it depends on what you want to accomplish. CRM is a great place to start. It's the foundation, because it's it's like building a foundation or building a house. It's the foundation, but you still need walls, and you still need, the framing and the drywall, and then you still need appliances. You need a lot of things that go on top of CRM. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening that say, hey, I've got CRM, and shouldn't I just be able to do whatever I need to do with my CRM solution? And the answer really is yes and no. Like, no, because CRM doesn't have that functionality by itself, but yes, in that you add additional solutions on top of CRM to make it have everything that you need.
Interesting. So we obviously, you're talking about the sales CRM really as kind of the house or the system of record, the foundation, but on top of that, we need to go much deeper. We need to really transform the way we're building up our sales stack. So how would you define one's goal of sales transformation? How should we go about the transformation?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked, because that's one of the things that, I do like to talk about is what are we trying to accomplish? We've had CRM for 30 years. When I was selling the laptop, that's really when CRM came into fruition. And so we've had it for 30 years. And we can't keep doing the same things that we've been doing and expect different results. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? I've come up with something that I think, look, pretty much everyone's going to agree on. No one's going to disagree with this, but it's basically what can we do to sell more in less time at the right price, and ultimately what we want to do is do all of those three things with fewer salespeople, right? Because that
sounds impossible, Nancy. Can we do this?
Well, yeah, it is impossible without changing. And that's where transformation comes in. And so I just really encourage people, look, nobody likes to change, and it's difficult. It really is difficult to change, because, look, especially in sales, we're all focused on just hitting the number. And we've been used to doing that with just brute force. Let's just make more phone calls, send out more emails, ride the sales reps harder. But, we've been doing that. So we have to think about doing other things. So what's going to allow us to sell more in less time at the right price with fewer salespeople? Where do we start? How do we go about doing that?
Well, you pretty much set up the question. I mean, where do we start, right? There are hundreds of tools. You know this as well as anyone else. If not the one, you're the one professing this with the guidance that you're giving the industry on all the tech stack out there. How do we get started, and where do we put our attention?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing to know or to just recognize is that what you need to do as a company is different than what other people need to do as a company, because everybody is different. Everyone has different solutions. We all have different sales models. We have different resources. So, that's part of what makes it difficult. The other thing that makes it difficult is that there are a lot of sales solutions. This is a landscape that we put together to help people identify what tools are available to help with different levels of what I call the sales hierarchy. And this, helps, but in a way it makes it harder because it's difficult to start. So we actually did put together a couple of frameworks. One, I'm going to talk a little bit about both of them, but one of them is called the revenue hierarchy. And what you see in red here across the top, those are the different levels of the hierarchy. And so the tools that help people understand who to sell to and why are kind of listed in this first column here. And then how to engage and when are listed in this column. And I'm going to go into more details, but just back to, where do you start? One of the questions is who in your organization is going to be responsible for determining that? So you may think, maybe you're a first-line sales manager and you're thinking, gosh, what can I do to implement technology? That's a great question, but we have to think organizationally and also culturally. Is there a management mandate that says, look, we've got to figure out how to use technology in a way that's going to give us a strategic advantage? And I've assigned this person and this person and this person from different groups. Typically, it might be marketing operations, maybe even product marketing, sales ops, sales enablement, and then, the sales leadership. Those are all roles that should be pulled from in order to have a group, a cross-organizational group that can all get into alignment to say, here's what we're going to focus on, here's why it's important, and who's going to be in charge of which element.
Interesting. So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Nancy. Okay. Well, I see this slide, and two, would I say, emotions come to me, and so it leads me to two questions I wanted to ask you when I see this slide. One, the first thing is I get really excited. It's like a kid in a candy store, right? I see all of these logos, and I think, where am I going to get the budget? I want to try these. I want to test them. But then the next thought comes to me is just like this overwhelming anxiety of, how do I know which one is the right tech stack for my organization? So I guess my first question is, one, with so many technologies available, which ones are the most innovative, and which trends do we need to be paying attention to? That's one. And then my other question is, Nancy, this is the first time you've produced the sales technology landscape. What is the number one question you have received since rolling this out?
Well, first is usually how the heck did you do it? Because, there's just a lot of logos there. And I actually put it off for a long time because I wasn't sure it would be helpful, like just to put a bunch of logos on a landscape. So I really wanted to make sure it was wrapped up with a framework to make sense of it all. But you mentioned a question a second ago about, which are the most innovative tools, or where do you see the innovation taking place? And that's a question I get asked all the time, and I don't really like the question. I understand why everybody asks it, but I don't think we're there yet as an industry. And when I say industry, I just mean as practitioners. Right? We should be looking at the basics. Let's make sure we have the basics covered first, because we're still a long way from, making sure that we've got that under control. I mentioned a minute ago that CRM is still kind of considered, look, I've got that, isn't that enough? It's kind of considered, all right, we've got it, we can just skate for a while and just focus on trying to hit the numbers by brute force. So we have a lot of room to go between covering the basics and getting to the point where we're really looking at the most innovative types of solutions. So, I mean, did that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And so you laid out the point of CRM is really just the foundational beginning. I mean, if anyone out there is thinking that CRM is going to help them create sales velocity, I think you're sorely mistaken, right? It's going to help you collect your data. It's going to help you have better database on your buyers and your accounts, but it's not necessarily going to create velocity or sales acceleration. So when you talk about the basics, CRM to me is perhaps the core basics. What's next? Where do we go from there?
Yeah. Well, I guess the one point that I would want to make is that for all the sales leaders listening, it's human nature to think about what we need, what's in it for me. And I would just ask, instead of only looking for, look, how can we coach better? How can we understand the forecast better? All those things are important. But let's also think about just the salesperson and the sales process and what the salespeople need. Because selling is really the only organization in a company I can think of where we tell a person, look, you have to be responsible for hundreds of different activities that are all at different stages across hundreds of different prospects or people that you're working with, and go keep track of that. But we don't give them a lot of tools. CRM, as you said, is a system of record. And so, yes, we're asking sales reps to log all that information, but it's not really a tool to help them execute on all of those different activities and keep it straight. So that's the one thing I would say is really think about what your salesperson does on a daily basis and what's going to help them most execute throughout the day, because everything else will come into place. They'll be able to take better care of the customer. They'll have more accurate proposals. They'll be able to close the deal faster. They'll be able to sell at the right price. There's all kinds of things that happen because they have the right tools to do their job. And I have a framework to think about that. Should I jump into that, or do you want to talk about it?
No, you got me thinking about that now. I would love to understand now what is these needs you're talking about, or this hierarchy you're talking about. Let's jump into that.
Okay. All right, cool. So I mentioned these red headings here. They associate with the revenue hierarchy. So that's what I'm going to show next. And I'm sure everybody's heard of Maslow. So I was just thinking about, well, when it comes to selling, what's the most important fundamental need before everything else? And really, if you think about it, it's who do you sell to? Because if you're not selling to the right people or prospects for the right reasons, then nothing else is going to matter. Your efforts are going to be wasted. So you really have to nail who are we going to sell to and why. And that's all the persona-based things. It's the accounts. It's the right list of accounts for your territory. It's within each account. What should they be buying from us if they're not yet buying? And people may have heard of, the white space analysis. It's why do these people need things from us? So really spending the time to think about who to sell to. You have to nail that. Then once you've nailed that, you can move up. So you move up, and the next step is when and how do you actually get these people to engage? It's really tough. There's so much messages that are being thrown at buyers through email and social and everything that it's just overwhelming for buyers, and they've shut down. So then it begs the question, well, then how do you get them to actually engage with you? And there's some new technologies that can help you do that. The other thing is when and how do you engage? What's the right time? So you've got who to sell to, how do we get them to engage? Then the next step is, all right, now that we've gotten them to engage, how do we convey value in a way that all the members of the buying team will say, yep, that makes sense. This is going to provide a lot of value for us, and so we want to, move forward with considering it. So it's the classic why buy-in from you. Then the next level of the hierarchy is, okay, now that all of that is done, how do you close the deal? And this is obviously the most important, in a way, because if you've done all of these other things and you get to the close and you can't bring in the deal, that's a huge waste of sales capacity. So you really got to make sure you nail that as well. And then finally, the self-actualization, if you will, compared to Maslow's, is the how do we get them to buy again? How do we sell more? How do we upsell and cross-sell and get them to renew? But notice that those are all really focused on the salesperson. And again, it's about helping them be more effective in their own job. So where does things like, managing and forecasting and coaching and developing and motivating come in? Those are things that I've got here as the base, but they really kind of permeate the entire hierarchy because you're doing all those things throughout the entire sales process. But what I encourage is for people to look at this revenue hierarchy and then say to themselves, how do we know whether or not we have this first one nailed? What are some of the questions we could be asking ourselves to know whether or not we're selling to the right people? And we have a whole checklist of questions for each of these levels, and it's in a guide, and I can tell people how to get that. But it's also really good to just come up with your own questions because everyone is different. So for us, it might be, well, do we know who all the buyers are for our type of solution? Are we missing anyone? So there's just those types of questions. And then when you ask those questions for all of these levels, then you can identify where do we start, right? Because if we feel like, hey, maybe we don't have who to sell to 100%, but we're pretty close, and where our biggest problem is trying to get customers to engage. Then you know that that's where you should start, and you can go back to that landscape and look at the different technologies that fit under that category. So
yeah, and that's you.
Yeah.
No, I hope you don't mind if I stop you there for a second, because you planted the thought with all of us, not only myself, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners of, okay, so there's this hierarchy, but it begs the questions for large enterprise companies like Adobe all the way to your early stage startups wondering, but where am I then? How do I know where I'm at along this roadmap or this journey or maturity model? Is there a way for me to understand where my business lies and what I should be thinking about currently and future state?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and we thought about that because everyone is different and they are all at different stages. So we did put together a maturity model, if you will. This looks really, like, where do I start? This is there's a lot on this slide, I know, but let me just point out that what we've got is we've got the maturity level across the top. So we've got white belt, blue belt, and then all the way up to black belt. Obviously, white belt is less sophisticated. Black belt is, hey, we're firing on all cylinders. And then on the left are the different hierarchy levels that I just talked about. So you could take each one and say, well, if we decided that someone to sell to was where we're struggling the most, let's take a look at where are we? Where do we fit? If we're at the white belt level, because all we're really offering our salespeople is, connection to the internet and maybe LinkedIn, and so they can do some searches and do their own research. That's not a very sophisticated level. So that's a white belt level. And you might then say, we should consider the tools that are at the blue belt level, because then that's the next natural step. Let's look into some lead list building. Let's make sure our marketing department has some sort of web visitor tracking. Now that might be for a smaller size company. Most enterprises, will at least be at the blue belt level. But that's how to read the sales stack maturity model. So if I go back to this slide here, you can really go to any level and kind of see what are the different types of technologies at the different maturity levels. And again, we just want this to help people know where to start. So the first thing is, where are we suffering the most challenges? And then once we know that, we can figure out, well, where are we in terms of technology?
Right, which really kind of leads me to my next thought here, obviously, is, okay, what are you seeing in terms of maturity across all the organizations that you're doing business with, and how do you know what your sales stack looks like compared to others when we're trying to benchmark ourselves, our business against our peers or competitors out there?
Yeah. Well, we are doing our first annual sales tech benchmark survey right now, and it would be great for people to go to our website and then it's smartsellingtools.com, and then use, a /survey. If you fill out the survey, our goal is to give everyone back the results that will tell them, look, this is where companies that look like you are at. We're asking questions about 23 different technologies, and we'll be able to slice it by company size, by sales model, by industry, so that you'll know, are we way behind, or are we actually doing okay? Are we way ahead of where most of the industry is? I just think it'd be a good thing overall, too, to keep track of that on a year-by-year basis. But we have a feel right now in terms of where everyone is at. So let me just skip back ahead to, oops, went too far. So this is where, and again, please keep in mind that there's companies of all different sizes, so this is a little bit of a generalization here. But I think we're pretty close. I mean, for the most part, we're still in the blue belt level. And when you look at, why buy from you or from us, and why buy and from a vendor, we're still kind of just using things like PowerPoint. And when it comes to how to close, we're still doing proposals with spreadsheets and Word and email, just typical office products and solutions. So this is kind of the reality today. Does this surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me, but I almost have an allergic reaction to when I hear people are still doing closing deals with spreadsheets and Word. I just, like that, it hurts me to think that some of our organizations are still required to work that way.
Yeah, yeah. And even some of the largest companies, it's the same way. I mean, they may have some tools that they built internally. Some are very sophisticated. Obviously, you can't characterize the enterprise market one way or the other. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you are an enterprise type of a company, it's not uncommon to not, be at a belt level higher than blue. Or maybe it's just your division. There's a lot of companies that are growing by acquisition, and so one division might be at a blue belt level and another might be at a black belt level. So it's, yeah. I think one of the ones that I want to zero in on, because it's one that Adobe really helps with, and that in its most important hierarchy level is, how do you close, right? If we're using spreadsheets and documents, there's a lot of tools that we can use for that. And in our report, we do have some examples. So here is the page from how to close, and notice we still have the maturity levels across the top, but on the left we've got a different index. And so we've got, well, what are some examples of the different technologies? A blue belt would be e-signatures and proposal creation at the very least. Let's do that. Let's make it possible to send documents to prospects from any device, because that's how salespeople work. Let's be able to create something automatically and have the right signing fields automatically populated right from, say, Salesforce. So create the actual proposal based on the products that are selected in Salesforce. I mean, it does get pretty sophisticated even at the blue belt level. And then, be able to get those contracts signed faster. Under the purple belt is things like CPQ or configuration, pricing, and quoting. And that's when you have a very complex product line that can easily be configured the wrong way, maybe with the wrong parts, or you piece it together. It's got to be configured in a way that makes sense, and it can be hard to do without a program that's meant to do that specifically. Then you can move up to things like the account and opportunity management. That's some of the things I mentioned, like white space analysis. How do we reinforce the process of selling into our accounts and making sure that we move people through the stages in the right way, collaborating on complex deals and so forth. And then on the black belt side is more of the contract lifecycle management, maybe even the what we call the customer lifecycle management, or how can we get the most revenue out of each customer. So, you know, don't start at the black belt. One of the things that's most important is to get some early wins. Everyone is afraid of adoption, and our salespeople are going to really use it. So getting some technologies that are going to be successful early on is really important as well.
This makes me think, Nancy, it takes me back to my 8-year-old self, literally sitting in my dojo, getting ready to get from my yellow belt to my green belt, and sitting there in the horse stance and thinking, this is taking forever. And I was sweating and my knees were shaking, waiting for my next belt, but it felt so worth it. I'm thinking, much like my 8-year-old self who is ready for that next belt, our listeners, you know, we are all going to be realizing this takes time. You can't rush it. It's going to hurt. Literally, your business knees will be shaking, but we have to be patient because we can't force ourselves into a black belt.
Yeah, that's a great and obvious analogy, and you're right. It's, you know, there's so much hype in the market that I think we all start to get a real inferiority complex, like, oh my God, we're so behind and we must be the only ones that don't know what we're doing. And that's not true. I mean, in a sales organization, there really isn't anyone in control or who's in charge and motivated, incented to make sure that you weave technology into the people and process equation. And that's a big barrier. So that's one of the first things, as I mentioned at the start, to do. And that part's not easy. You know, there's the Sales Enablement Society. If anyone's a sales enablement practitioner and don't yet know about that, you should check it out. But one of the first tasks they did was to figure out, well, what's the definition of sales enablement? And it took months and a big committee, you know, to all weigh in and come up with a definition. So none of this is easy, but I think with some frameworks and a commitment, you know, you just sort of move forward from, you know, the white belt stage on up to the black belt based on what's most important to you. And I mentioned, you know, we're at the how to close thing right now, and I mentioned the, you know, early wins, and I really do like e-signatures as an early win, because here's the thing. Most companies want to get a solution that is going to give them a quick time to value, that doesn't take a big committee or a big, huge buying process to make a decision on, that doesn't, you know, cost a lot, that sales reps are going to use, and it's going to give them an easy win. And e-signatures really fits into that. I think proposal creation is another one that fits into that. And after all, those are both helping you close deals. So that's a good place just to start if you feel like you have the other areas covered. I mentioned a survey that we're doing. We did another one a year or so ago on consideration, acquisition, and performance of sales tools. And one of the things that we realized is that, you know, time kills deals. A lot can go wrong between the time you get a verbal and the time that you actually get a signed deal. I think CSO Insights, Jake, you probably know the answer to this, but I think they have a stat of something like maybe just under 50% of deals don't actually end up closing after the verbal. Do you know what that stat is?
Oh, if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago and I read through that benchmark, I could have told you exactly, but I think it's somewhere around, yeah.
It's high, and that's heartbreaking because we have limited sales capacity to begin with, and we put a lot of effort, and sometimes we have sales cycles that are, you know, months and months long to get to the point where they don't actually sign the deal. It's crushing, and people can lose jobs over that. But the fact is that, you know, companies reorganize, budgets get cut, they get put on hold, people leave, priorities get changed because of market, you know, events. So a lot can happen, and time literally does kill deals. So it's very important to, you know, get the deal in when you can after the verbal, and that, you know, e-signatures help with that. And I want to just point out one other thing about what we found in e-signatures, because this is interesting. When we we want to find out how many sales tools do people use and which ones do they find to be the highest in satisfaction. And e-signatures came in ranked number 2 in overall satisfaction, those that thought they were very satisfied and satisfied. And that when we asked people to rank what the perceived benefit was for each of the tools, to rank the benefits, those that actually use e-signature rated it number 1. Those that did not use e-signature rated it number 13. So there's a big misperception in terms of how beneficial e-signatures really is. And considering that people use on average 5 sales tools, and e-signatures is usually the 6th tool selected, a lot of people are missing out on something that gives great benefit and that early win, which is one of the things I was talking about.
So it's interesting you bring this up, because it's where my thought goes is, much like CRM is now considered just a standard must-have tool or even operation system essentially for our sales organization, seems like the next thing naturally should be having an automated e-signature sales process as part of your stack. It's just something that should naturally be there, because those who do it recognize the core value of it. Those that don't are missing out, but the point is they need to become aware that they're missing something key in the velocity of their sales cycle.
Yeah. To be frank, I think what happens is people think e-signature, so that's just a little utility, right? It's just, I don't know if we really need to spend time on that. We've got bigger fish to fry. But it's not really a utility, because it also does, well, even if it was just a utility, right? You're talking about getting the deal signed faster before there's a chance for the deal to go south. And so it's a pretty powerful utility, but of course it does other things as well. So, look, it doesn't have to be a big, huge, platform and require a lot of resources for it to make a big impact. And there just are a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about tools in general. Like, what kind of impact is it going to have on customer experience? What kind of impact is it going to have on, freeing up our sales reps' time so that they can spend it on higher value activities? So that, there's just a lot of things to consider. Mm-hmm.
Now you've got me thinking as we're talking, because this isn't just you're actually leading to my question. I love this.
Okay.
My next question was, I love it. The next slide is, okay, we took a second and we talked about the maturity model. We talked about where we should be considering ourselves benchmarking against what the market is doing. But we glazed over perhaps one of the more exciting slides here that everyone's paying attention to right now as they get ready and geared up for 2018 is this slide right here. So thank you for going back. Talk to us a little bit more about these technologies and what they do and how we should be thinking about this slide itself when we're putting our stack together.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is, again, with the authority, who's going to be in charge of this? With that comes budget. And what we find a lot of times is that sales doesn't really think about allocating a lot of budget. They think about it so little, in fact, that the early results of our survey, even though people say that they're using about 6 tools on average, when we ask them for the amount of money they spend per sales rep, it's coming back at around $125. So people don't have really much of a clue in terms of how much tools cost, and therefore they're not budgeting appropriately for them. And then therefore they're going to get stuck not having the right technology to help salespeople. Because CRM by itself is $125 a month if you use a Salesforce or some of the other leading CRM solutions. So I thought that was...
Can I stop you? Can I stop you on that thought really quick? Because I know this is a question that I get asked, and a lot of people ask is, what should leaders be thinking about when They think about how much they should be spending, per user per month, or per. Let's go back to just their individual seller on a monthly or annual basis. How much should we be investing in our sellers?
It's,
for technology specifically.
I'll give an opinion on that. I don't know what the right academic answer is, but my opinion is that when you are looking at, paying a salesperson, going through all the onboarding, all the training, and you're paying them, we budget for that, right? Onboarding and training. You're paying them, $150,000, $200,000 a year. You should be budgeting in 10% of that for tools. So yeah, that's a lot of money. But, you're talking about this is your main engine for driving revenue. And what's the alternative? Not giving them any tools, or giving them, just making them kind of scrap by with CRM. CRM is not a productivity tool, by the way. It actually reduces productivity when people first get it, because it eats up more time from the sales rep than it gives them back. Now, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't use it. They should use it, but in order for it to be a productivity tool, we need to invest in additional solutions.
So I hope our sales leaders out there are listening to that. I mean, I would agree with you. I think I've seen similar, but if you've got sellers in today's high competitive B2B or SaaS or even non-SaaS industry, but there's complexity to what we're doing, you need to be thinking about that budget for your sellers. 10% of that 150 to 200K, you're looking at anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 for your sellers. That's a hefty investment, yet, right? It's relevant.
Yeah. And think about all the different inflection points where you can use technology to improve, to really drive revenue. And again, getting back to that first slide, what you're doing is really transformational. You're trying to get to the point where you can sell more in less time at the right price for profitability and with fewer salespeople. Companies are digitizing their sales organizations now, and they're really trying to drive profits by producing more revenue with fewer reps. You can't do that unless you change. And you can't facilitate change unless you provide the tools that are going to aid in that change.
So it's not a magic wand. It's not, hey, we come to the end of the year, we're wrapping up. It's December, and we got to think about our FY18 go-to-market strategy. VP of Sales says, well, let's get more for less. It's not, you're not saying more for less. What you're saying is we can get more from who we have today in our organization if we invest strategically and properly into them.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean more for less.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. Ultimately, you would like to be able to do it, have the ratio of revenue to salespeople grow. That's what we're really talking about. So not necessarily fewer salespeople, but more revenue per salesperson.
And that's the magic there, right? It's more revenue per salesperson. I think that's the area that we're all trying to get to. Well, Nancy, we have about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that we leave time for those listening if they have any questions. Are you okay if we go to a Q&A here?
Sure, we can go to a Q&A. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Nancy, Jake, this has been great. I know I learned a ton. And we do have some great questions, so thank you everyone for the engagement. We have one by Lubos. So when I identify the color of our belt at my organization, what is the next step? What color should my company move to?
Okay, so let's go back to, let's see, where do I want to go back to? Let's go back to here. Okay, so the question is, look, I've identified which hierarchy level I want to zero in on and make improvements on. And I've identified which belt level I'm at right now. Is that the setup?
That's correct, yeah. And
Okay.
then I think he just wants to know, do you jump straight to black belt? Is this something that you go progressively along, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say don't go right to, don't skip levels unless one of these levels just isn't appropriate for what you do, because that could be the case. I think it more makes sense to just go to the next level. And that's why we did the maturity model, so that you could see, hey, look, if somebody's pitching me an AI email outreach program, and I don't even have, certain other things in place, maybe that I shouldn't be, setting up a call with them, because we've got to take care of the basics. Again, it's getting back to the basics versus what's the most innovative or sophisticated solution. Let's make sure we have our basics covered. And that would be going to the very next level.
Got it. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and then it's not like you're going to be, okay, let's move all of these hierarchies over to a blue belt. So we're up and down, we've got a sales stack that's totally all in the blue belt level. That, I can't see that ever really making sense. It's a kind of a fluid thing. You may already have you may be in a business where you know who your accounts are, and you really don't have to do any specific, lead list building or anything like that. You've already, you know that, even though you don't have a solution for that, you can jump ahead.
Right. Yeah, so you could be a black belt at one, you could be a blue belt at another, and it's all about just incremental improvements.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And then, Jake, there's a question probably best suited for you. So this is from Bob. Is there a point where the size of the deal does not warrant an e-signature? For example, you use an e-signature for a $200,000 deal.
Well, what would you use instead? I mean, I guess the option there is you want an inked deal with wet signatures. I guess I would have to ask whoever is asking that question a few clarifying questions. But in my opinion, is if you're looking at a $200,000 deal, you're not looking at a transactional deal. You're looking at a more complex sale, which requires more time. More time allows for more opportunity for the deal to go south, or for other obstacles to be introduced to the deal. And so, for my opinion, is you should always be looking at ways that you can create velocity in your sales cycle, and e-signature is one great way to do that. Why require a manual process when you can actually add value back to your buyer and give them more time by providing with e-signature? So without understanding more about Bob's question, I would say I think e-signature makes sense for the whole, from transactional deals all the way to enterprise level deals.
Yeah, I would add, when it's a transactional thing, obviously you're just closing business just like that, right? There's a lot of transactions happening, and so e-signatures is really important. But on the bigger long-term sales cycle deals, it's just as important, but for different reasons. Typically, you're going to have some sort of, maybe even NDAs, memorandum of understandings, terms and conditions. There's all kinds of people and documents that require signature along the way, and e-signatures doesn't help you just get the signature, but it also helps you keep track of that whole contract process.
Correct. You touched on something more important. I think any of us who have been in enterprise sales before have experienced the pain and heartache of red lines. And I literally have lost deals on the last day due to legal red lines because we didn't have a good process set up for an e-signature process. And so, here we are in the throes of legal battles back and forth, not battles, but, reviews back and forth. And because we couldn't move that process through quickly, things get pushed along. And so if you have a faster more digital way of doing this, you could breeze through something like that a lot faster and save yourself some heartache.
Absolutely. And those red line losses have to be the most heartbreaking thing a salesperson can go through, for sure.
It's terrible. You won the deal, but you're stuck now because the process was too slow.
Yeah, totally. Well, I hope we answered the question there, Bob. Feel free to jump in and clarify, but thanks for that. Here is one from Adrian. Probably both of you. It would be great to get your opinion on this one. Which is the best lead generation tool in your opinion? Bit of a loaded question.
I can't answer that. I mean, there's just, you can't answer that. It's like someone, I always see these conversations on LinkedIn where people say, well, what CRM should I use? And then everybody, of course, weighs in with an opinion. And it's just an opinion. It depends. I mean, what is your, sales model? Do you have an inside sales model? Do you have an SDR, outside sales? It's just different. And then you look at it and you go, everyone has slightly different approach. So all I can do is say, here are the technologies that sort of fit into that category that you might want to take a look at.
Well, I'd be happy to jump in there, Nancy, and I'm going to answer this on a technicality on semantics here, because you said, whoever asked the question said tool, not technology. And I think this is universal, and you're not going to like my answer, but I'm going to say it anyways, but it's the telephone. It's a tool that we all should be comfortable with and is relevant in regardless of what industry you're in or what process you're in or what sales stack you use or what cycle or segment you sell to. You have to be comfortable picking up the phone and making calls, whether it's a cold call or a warm call or demo. If you're not comfortable or you dread picking up the phone, you have to take a long look into the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And just to expand on that, if you think about, we've set this this landscape based on the hierarchy, but you could just close your eyes and think about what happens in a day of a life of a salesperson. And if they pick up that phone, first of all, they have to have someone to call. So who's the right person at that company? How do you reach them? What's their phone number? Can you send them an email? What should you say? All these things come into view. So have you provided all of that for that salesperson? Once they are on the phone and they get the person on the phone, what if the person says, hey, it does sound interesting. Can the salesperson immediately jump to get them on a web conference? Do they have an easy way to facilitate saying, hey, do you have a minute? Let me just show you what that looks like right now. Go to this link. And then if they are able to do that, do they have the ability to quickly find whatever is the right content to show that person at that moment of interest? There's lots of different scenarios, but if you just kind of close your eyes and think about, well, what's the flow and what happens, and are we leaving our salespeople out to dry because we haven't given them everything they need at all of these different points? It might be easy to think about it that way and know where you're lacking in terms of technology.
Absolutely. And yeah, I love both those answers, and Jake, I would definitely agree that the phone, in my opinion, has always been the number one thing that moves the needle. And so we have another question from Dan. It's a little bit longer of a question. It's regarding implementation and adoption of sales tools. So first question is, what is an appropriate amount of time to dedicate to training reps on the sales stack?
A lot more than you think. Whatever that number is. The SaaS industry has us thinking that, hey, because we can just buy a license and turn it on and, we've got it now, that it should be that easy to use. And most of us realize, hey, we're going to have to learn how to use it. But I don't think that there's often as much consideration for not just learning the tool, but reinforcing the purpose of the tool and asking questions of the sales reps. Hey, are you finding it helpful? Where are the hitches? How are you? What's been successful so far? Really have to keep that dialogue going because it's hard for everyone to change. And we're talking about some tools that might or might not fit into everyone's workflow or normal way of thinking, which brings me to another point, and that is that you shouldn't require everyone to use every tool. Have a culture of experimentation where you say to the rep, hey, if this, use some tools, try them out. If you think it's going to help you, and then let us know, share it with your fellow reps, what's working, what isn't working, and maybe even have a list of approved tools that sales reps can pick from, and maybe even another list of experimental tools that you're giving them permission to try out if they want to. No salesperson wants to just waste their time, so I don't think you have to worry about that happening where, oh, we're just going to be playing with tools all day long. They really do want to close business, so I think this is all positive in taking that approach.
Yeah, that's super interesting, actually. Yeah, go ahead, Jake. I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well.
Yeah, I just wrapped up a project with my program manager where we just implemented, or we're about to implement. We just contracted 8 new tools for our stack for 2018. And I'll tell you, I can appreciate the question or the concern behind the question, because the number one thing I am obsessing about right now is adoption, right? How do we drive adoption? And I think the thing that I keep coming back to is that we've got to get the word train out of our vocabulary and replace it with the word coach. Because training, it seems more like a transactional, like event type of a concept where we train them and then we set them loose and we tell them to go. But that's not what we should be doing with our sellers. We should be coaching our sellers much like we would on any team sport. We don't put them in a gym, with a bag of basketballs and tell them to, go play the game. We got to coach them, and we got to stand by their sides, and we got to be there constantly with them. And so when I think about the amount of time it's going to take to reinforce and properly drive adoption of technologies, it's constant. It's not a single event. We need to be there with them, and we need to be by their side, and we need to be coaching them on how to do it properly. And if they're not, we need to be evaluating our coaching process.
Yeah,
totally.
amen.
Absolutely, yeah. Ongoing coaching beats, that one-off dreaded training that sales reps strongly dislike. So I think we have time for one more question, and this is, again, to both you, Nancy and Jake. Can you provide an example of a time when you faced challenges implementing a new tool?
So can you ask that again?
Can you provide an example of a time when you faced challenges implementing a new tool?
Oh, geez. I'll give you a list.
Yeah, right.
Every time?
Every time. Nancy, if you don't mind, I'll maybe tackle this one first. But, I mean, there's any kind of obstacle that can and will pop up, or can and could pop up will, right? It's as it goes, is that it's either going to be your personal organization is not ready, and you've got all the different stakeholders involved internally that aren't doing their part in driving the implementation on time. So, there's always the issue of, is our organization actually prepared to implement? And the next thing is there's all kinds of technology issues that could potentially happen from the vendor. Then there's the back-end issues of, are our solutions playing nicely with one another, and do they communicate well, and are they passing data back and forth? So there's obstacles there. I mean, there are a list of things that could, and I guarantee you will go wrong. But I think the question is, how invested are you in the technology that you're procuring, and how important are they to you and your organization that they need to work? Because if you're spending dollars on things that matter, it's worth the pain, and it's worth the investment of time and resources to get working. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck, and you're going to let it become shelfware, and that's the quickest way to lose your job.
Yeah, I couldn't have answered it any better.
Awesome. And yeah, so that looks like our time. Just lastly, if people want to get in touch with either of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Do we have a slide here maybe that can give our contact information? I think right at the end we might have one, right?
I went back to the beginning. Sorry. Oops. Sorry about that. Let's do this.
No problem.
Put the slide up.
There we go.
There it is.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, I mean, anyone who wants to talk sales technology or just get some advice, feel free to email me. Happy to do that. It's through conversations with real practitioners that I stay on top of what's important for you all. The other thing I would say is if you do go to our website under content, look for the Building a Sales Stack guide, and go ahead and get that, because that has a lot of the material I showed today, along with some of the checklists so that you can figure out which of those levels in the hierarchy should you be working with first, and a whole lot of other material. It's 67 pages long. So again, go to our site under content and you'll find it there.
And I'll just say, hey, if you want to talk, hit me up. I'm ready to talk. So I'm available via email or Twitter, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for your time and your insight. And to everyone else, who joined us today, thank you very much for your time and attendance as well. And good luck closing out Q4, everyone.
All right. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Likewise. Take care.
Bye.